Me, I'm Richard Payne. I'm the head of technology for Holden, which is basically, I'm the guy who's supposed to know what he's talking about half the time. We're a distribution company. We work for quite a few manufacturers. Including Blackmagic Design, Panasonic Broadcast, Data Video, Teradek, Paralinks, Small HD, and a few others besides. So we deal with a large variety of equipment. So I used to be a cameraman years ago, and then after that I worked for a company that built NLE edit systems. So I've got a good sort of rounded knowledge of the cameras I'm talking about, and I'm going to talk a bit about the cameras and a bit about production and editing using the footage as well. So it helps, hopefully will help you differentiate between the cameras when you're looking at them round this place later on today. So I'm not going to hang about because, you know, you're here to poke and prod and see the stuff, not look at a PowerPoint. So I just want to go through it quickly, and hopefully it will answer some of the frequently asked questions before we start playing with the kit. Right. Around this building we have most of these here. These are the Panasonic current 4K cameras. We don't have a VariCam, but we do have most of the other kit here. So I'll talk about them individually in a minute. And we've also got a range of the Blackmagic 4K cameras. If they're not up here, they're going to be down on the Blackmagic van or down next to the Blackmagic van. So we can go through in detail the two different manufacturers and talk about what's good and bad, you know, when you're poking and prodding the cameras. So let me first of all start with the Panasonic range, because I've got to start somewhere. So anybody got a GH4? The GH4 was the first Panasonic 4K camera. It came out nearly 2 years ago now, although they are still very current. In fact, we recently sold 9 to the Top Gear production company for the Chris Evans Top Gear, and we did 6 to the Amazon production company. It's great. The split in Top Gears has given us all these new sales. So they're being used for in-car recording, so they're very current. The good thing about GH4s is, this is the new version of the GH4R. If you haven't heard of the GH4R, the advantage is it does unlimited recording. So you don't have a half-an-hour limit on the size of files. And it's also got log recording as well. It's got an extended dynamic range recording mode. So as long as you grade it later in DaVinci or some other program, you can get 12 and a half full stops of dynamic range out of it, which is more than you'll get if you don't shoot log mode. So it does 4K and UHD. The 4K this does is only at 24 frames a second. The UHD is 25 or 30. It does HD at up to 96 frames a second, so you can use that mode if you want to do, you know, a slow-mo for, you know, people dancing, whatever you like. It does go a bit soft, the slow-mo, when you go up to 96 frames a second. Personally, I think it tops out about 70, looking quite good. Go to 96, it's getting a bit softer, because it's using a sort of line skipping. It's using less resolution to do the faster frame rates. But it's perfectly usable. If you want to analyse your tennis swing or your golf swing or something like that, the 96 frames will look fine for most people. It's just people like us who are quality junkies are going to go, oh, that's a bit soft. Anyway, so it also has this V-Log Lite setting if you get a GH4R. If you've got an existing GH4, you can buy an upgrade from Panasonic. So you can buy the log setting to give you that extended dynamic range. But if you have an existing GH4, you can't make it record more than half an hour. The update only gives you the V-Log, not the more than half an hour. So those are the advantages of a GH4. Affordable long form, so it's using SDHC cards where you'll get, even at 4K on a 64 gig, you'll get about an hour and a half or so. And last time I looked, a very fast 4K SDHC card was costing about 40 quid. So this is really cost effective for shooting 4K. Nothing else will give you that sort of bang per buck. And also the cost of them, ask the Proactive guys what their current cost for a Panasonic GH4R is, but it's probably in around £1,000 or so. So you're getting a lot of camera for the money. It does stills. It does very good quality stills as well as video, and you can use Canon lenses with something called a Metabone Speed Booster. If you don't know what a Metabone Speed Booster is, ask the guys from Proactive because they sell them. Right, the next camera here.
What's the standard lens mount?
It's micro four thirds. The GH4 is a micro four thirds mount. So lenses from Olympus and Panasonic both make micro four thirds, and a few other, Samyang and a few other manufacturers now as well. So this camera here, this is the HC-X1000. So this does 4K and UHD up to 50p. So it will do 50 frames a second. Now, a few people I've talked to, talking about 4K, say the problem is I do sport or I do stuff with fast motion or I'm doing run and gun stuff, and if you're only shooting at 25 frames a second and things are moving fast in front of you, obviously you're going to get this sort of 25 frames jerkiness. You don't get this with 50 frames, you get smoother motion. So that the Panasonic camcorders can all do 4K at 50p, not just 25p. However, the GH4 can only do it at 25p. So 4K and UHD at 50p. It's a small sensor, which does limit its low light skills. This camera would be okay in this type of setup. We've got a reasonable level of light, but if you're doing darker stuff, if you're filming plays and things where there are lower levels of light, be careful. Because it's a small chip and it's 4K, if you think about it, each little bucket on the sensor, which is a bucket to collect light, has to be physically smaller to fit 4K, to fit the higher resolution sensors in. It literally doesn't get as many photons hitting it because it's a smaller bit of sensor. So small sensor 4K cameras are great because you've got a wide depth of field. You can do run and gun stuff. You can shoot wedding when things are all moving in front of you. However, you're limited in low light abilities. So that small sensor, but it has, because of a small sensor, it can optically have a 20 times zoom, so you've got a very wide zoom range for a camera that's giving you 4K, and it's got 2 SD slots, so you can record all day, because you can swap one to another as you fill one and go to another. It can also do little tricks, like it can record HD to one and 4K to the other cards, so you can give somebody the HD master but keep the 4K stuff for yourself. So this camera, the HC-X1000, is about 1,500–1,600 quid plus VAT. So it's a camcorder for 4K stuff. It's got XLR inputs, but reasonably priced. Right, this camera here, I'm glad there's one I can finally point at, is the new DVX200 from Panasonic. And this is the first of its kind. It's the first large sensor camera to have a built-in zoom lens. So this doesn't take Sony lenses, it doesn't take any other manufacturer's lenses, it's a built-in 13 times Leica lens on it. So it's got a micro four thirds sensor. The sensor is actually the same size as a GH4, but it's not the GH4 sensor, it's the next generation on from the GH4 sensor. And it does 4K and UHD up to 50. By the way, the 4K on all the cameras, when I say full 4K, it's only up to 24 frames a second. The UHD, which is 3840 by 2160 pixels, that's what it does at up to 50 or 60 frames a second. It also does HD at 120 frames a second. The HD on this is sharper than the GH4 HD at 96 frames a second, so you can get away with using 120. So again, brilliant for analysing golf swings. You can't stop a bullet at 120 frames a second, but you can get some lovely slow motion look to footage. But it is softer than it would be if you're recording full HD or 4K. 13 times zoom lens. So the 13 times zoom lens, it's the equivalent of about 30 to 385 mil. So it's a pretty wide zoom range. Now, to get that sort of lens on a large sensor camera like a FS5 or an FS7, you'd probably be looking at a lens costing £20–30,000, if it even exists, because it's hard to build a lens which has a large zoom range but also can work with large sensors. It's a very difficult sort of optical process to manufacture this lens. But what Panasonic have done, because it's a fixed lens camcorder, is they've tuned the lens and the sensor electronically so you get the best possible results from this lens. So you're getting no chromatic aberration, you're not getting breathing when you focus, so it's not zooming in and moving a little bit when you focus. You can do a slow zoom with this lens. You can use it in a macro mode, so you can film something only 10 centimeters in front of the lens and then do a slow zoom. You know, that sort of stuff, because the lens has been made by the same firm to optically be perfect with that sensor. So there's some really clever stuff going on with it. So you're not just getting the camera, you're getting a brilliant lens as well. but of course you can't use it on anything else. It's got twin SD card slots. Guys, what is the cost? What's your price for a DVX200? Do you know off the top of your head? Yeah. So it's a lot of camera for the money because you're getting such a stunning lens with it. So twin SD slots, again, you can record 4K to one, HD to another, or you can do proxy files if you want. V-Log light is standard, so you've got this expanded dynamic range mode if you want as well. So if you're happy to put up with a bit of processing, and I'll talk about that a bit more detail in a minute, you can use V-Log mode to give you more dynamic range. And the monitoring on this, you've got a 1920-1080 OLED rear EVF, as well as a 1920-1080 flip out screen, so it's very high quality monitoring, considering you don't have to add lots of toys to this. The only box we put on is a wireless video sender to send the pictures next door in HD, so you don't need anything extra, you don't need extra monitors and things because it's all built in. It takes the standard Pana batteries, and there's a little battery box on the back. So other nice things about this is it's HDMI 2 out, so you can come out fully in 4K at 50 frames a second, although if you do that, it does disable the internal recording. It only does 25 frames a second output. These days, cameras are all processors with sensors, and the processors are not capable of doing everything at once, so there are always these caveats. This camera also, this is capable of recording internally, but it's all 8-bit 420 color space. It's not a full broadcast spec recording. And that's the compromise they've made to go with cheap SDHC cards. You know, why do you think you can use 40 quid cards in this? It's because it's recording at a lower quality setting than, you know, another camera which uses much more expensive media. But it can do that because this is designed for events, for videography, for stuff ending up on Vimeo and YouTube, where it doesn't matter a jot that you filmed 8-bit 422 if you're ending up on Vimeo and YouTube, because they're all 8-bit 422 anyway. You won't get much advantage. Admittedly, you'll be able to push it a bit further in post if it was 10-bit 422, but you know, we can talk about that in more detail later. But this camera, the advantage is cheap 4K with shallow depth of field with a built-in lens. You can use it on autopilot. It's a run and gun 4K camera. Right, so let me go on to the next one. So the PTZ, this is a picture of a white one. It comes in black or white. This is the AW-UE70. It sounds like a U-boat. I can never remember this name because it's different to everything else. It's the first in the world 4K PTZ camera. It does UHD through HDMI, so it's not really 4K, it's UHD, 3840, 2160, 25p, and it comes out of the HDMI. It has got SDI, and it's also got a reference in as well, but it doesn't do 4K through SDI. It has got HD SDI, up to 50p, it's got a 20 times zoom, and it does 4K streaming, so you can actually stream a picture through the network connection in 4K to another location. So it makes for some quite interesting uses, this camera.
Is that full 4K streaming?
It's 4K, it's 25p 4K. Well, HDMI, sorry, it's UHD. So it's 3840, 2160 4K streaming, yes. So it's not full 4K, it's UHD. Whereas full 4K is 4096 and it doesn't do that. But it has got a sync input, so I should have turned my phone off. It's got a sync input, so you've got the ability to have multiple ones in a live event, but you'll be using them HD then, you wouldn't be using it 4K. So it makes it a bit more flexible.
How much weatherproof is it?
None at all. You'd have to put it in a dome to make it weatherproof. Yeah, none of these PTZs are weatherproof without putting them in something, which is weatherproof. Or indoors, of course, which is even more weatherproof. It also has micro SD recording, so this camera can act as a camcorder. So you can be recording onto a micro SD card in 4K and then pull the files off over the network later, which gives it some interesting sort of wildlife uses. You could put one in a owl box and it could be recording all the time onto a micro SD card, and then over FTP you can be pulling the files off as and when you need them, and you don't need the full ability of a network that's able to stream the 4K, because you can pull the files down not in real time. So you could have this camera connected wirelessly up in a tree, and obviously in a waterproof box, or an owl box presumably is waterproof, because I know they don't like getting wet. So you'll be able to download the footage later from this camera. So it gives you some interesting scenarios. And really what it comes from is the Panasonic make a hell of a lot of security cameras, and they've mixed together the two technologies of broadcast and security to come up with something which has got more features than anything else on the market.
Is it power over Ethernet?
It is, yes. These two cameras, or all the new range of Panasonic PTZs, are PoE, Power over Ethernet, which basically means with one cable, the Ethernet cable, as long as you've got a Power over Ethernet hub, you can feed it voltage, you can get the pictures, you've also got the machine control, so you don't need a bunch of cables going into it. Very good for quick rig stuff. However, if you're using it in a live event, you'd want to connect to SDI, not have the pictures coming over IP, because there's a big delay over IP for the pictures, which you don't get over the SDI. So live events, don't use it on IP, use it with SDI. But still, it saves you a power box. It means you can just have two cables into it instead of three.
Sound.
It has. It's got a. I'm glad you asked me that. I should have put that on the slide. It's got a 2.5 stereo mini jack. Sorry, 3.5 stereo mini jack input, so you can embed audio in the feed. So if you're using it as a camcorder, you can have a little mic, sitting below it or on top of it or wherever you like. So, the Panasonic VariCam. We don't have one of those here today, and the main reason is it's too heavy. We couldn't fit it in. But this is the very high-end production camera from Panasonic, which it competes with the Arri Alexa and the Red Dragon sensor, the Epic. This is a 35mm sensor. It's 14 plus stops of dynamic range. Some manufacturers lie about dynamic range. They're saying 14 plus because you really can see detail in more than 14 stops on the VariCam. Did anybody see Dr. Foster, the recent BBC drama? Shot on this. It's the first BBC drama that was shot on the VariCam. It does Vlog, not the Vlog Lite, but a full Vlog to give it that 14 stops. The way of filling that extra dynamic range in is to have this log mode, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. 120 frames per second in UHD, so it does 4K at 120 frames a second, or UHD at 120 frames a second. So this is a much more. Whereas this one only does it at HD, this will do it at full 4K. However, this is about £25,000. So it's in a different league, but based on a similar sort of technology. It doesn't use the cheap SDHC cards as you would expect. It uses a new format called Express P2. In fact, the clever thing about this camera is it can record 3 types of files simultaneously. So you can be recording full 4K onto these Express P2 cards, which cost a couple of £1,000, for 256 gig. And then you can be recording onto micro P2 cards, a full broadcast spec HD, and then onto an SD card you can be recording a proxy all at the same time. Let me turn that off. It's annoying me, so it must be really annoying you guys. Bloody BBC, something hasn't happened, has it? Oh no, nothing important.
The standard P2 cards of days gone by is useless in that case.
Yes, they are. Yeah. No, this is new Express card, because it has to record at least 4 times the data, and this records very high bit rate, sort of 444 AVC intra 4K files. So it just wouldn't be capable of the data rates. So that's why it had to come up with a new card.
Well, I've got micro P2.
Yeah, micro P2.
On my HC-X1000.
That's for recording, remember, the HD stream. So it can do 4K onto those, but only HD onto those. Yeah. And then a proxy file onto the SD. So it does the 3 types simultaneously. So that's the current Panasonic lineup for 4K cameras. And out of those, we've got the DVX200 here, and we've got the 4K PTZ. So have a poke and a play with those, and if you need any more detail, we have got a GH4 in a box if anyone wants to see one, so feel free. It was only we ran out of tripods. So the Blackmagic cameras, the first little 4K camera is on this slider here, going backwards and forwards on the track, and it's the Micro Studio 4K camera. If anyone was hoping to see a Micro Cinema camera here today, I'm afraid we don't have one yet. Blackmagic don't have one yet. There aren't any in Europe that I'm aware of. So we haven't got one of those there. But the Micro Cinema camera is not 4K. so it wouldn't fit in my 4K camera talk. That's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. So we're expecting to see the micro cinema early next year, but we haven't got one yet. Ask the Blackmagic guys, because they might have later info. So this does HD and Ultra HD, so it does UHD, this 4K 3840 2160 out. It can be remote controlled through the SDI. So if you have a Blackmagic switcher, you can control the iris, as long as it's an electronic iris camera. You can control the zoom if it's an electronic zoom camera, a zoom lens, and you can control the sort of colorimetry of it. You can have full CCU control over it from a Blackmagic ATEM switcher. You don't need any other boxes, just an ATEM switcher and this. So it also has a control for a B4 lens. So if you've got an electronic B4 lens, you can power it and control it through this breakout lead on the side. It does 6 gig SDI, so it doesn't do 6 gig SDI goes up to 30 frames in UHD. It doesn't do 50 frames in UHD. It's got talkback built into it, believe it or not, this tiny little thing, so you can plug a headset into it. It's got tally on top, so when you cut to it, the red light goes on. It's got PTZ control, so if you put it on a pan tilt zoom head, although we don't have a head yet that works with it, but it has, yes, sometimes marketing gets ahead of the engineering with Blackmagic, and this is one of the cases. So there will be PTZ heads. This does have the control coming out of it. And, joking apart, although, as I say, marketing at Blackmagic sometimes gets ahead of engineering, they always deliver. Eventually, we will have that support. Even if it's 6 months, it will come. So if you need that now, you might want to wait till it comes out before you buy it, but it will come. And this is a micro 4/3 sensor, so it's a micro 4/3 mount. So the same lens mounts from the same lens that work on a GH4 will work on this. If you want to use Canon lenses, you can use this thing called a Metabone speed booster. So it's fully controllable from the ATEM switcher. You can have a look at this down in the Blackmagic van. You can see the sort of control mechanism to make it brighter, darker, increase the pedestal or decrease it. All that CCU control is available from a laptop. Right, this is the existing...
What's the native ISO on it?
I think it's 400, but they haven't released that detail yet. We haven't got much detail about the sensor. So I don't even know the native resolution of the sensor. It's a different sensor to the other studio camera, but I don't have the details, I'm afraid. Again, Peter Dinsdale downstairs might know something I don't. In fact, it's very possible all he has to worry about is Blackmagic. So with any luck, ask him that one. Looking at the low light ability, it's either 400 or 800. I'd say it's closer to 400. Because it's not great in low light. Again, the smaller type sensor with low light isn't great. The reason these pictures, in this light is absolutely fine at probably low ISO is because it's a 0.95 aperture lens, right, which chose to partly just get that lovely shallow depth of field look. Right, so the production camera 4K, there's a Super 35 sensor. So this is also, the sensor in this camera is in the Ursa Mini there. It's got RAW and ProRes recording onto SSD drives, 25p or 30p, can't do 50p, 6 gig SDI, so it can do 25p or 30p through the SDI, SSD recording. There's 2 mounts, PL or EF mount. I'm skipping through it because it's the old one. And it's got 12 stops of dynamic range. But that 12 stops is the same as the Ursa we've got here because it's the same sensor. Incidentally, it's also the same sensor that was in the Xeon or the Aja Xeon camera. But I think Blackmagic get better color out of it, considering what they're doing with it. It's got a global shutter. Does anybody know the difference between a global shutter and a CMOS shutter? Anyone want to know the difference? Well, basically, a global shutter exposes the whole of the frame simultaneously, whereas a rolling shutter does it sequentially, so it reads it from top to bottom. So if a train's going whacking past the scene, the train will look like it's leaning over because as the sensor's read it, the train's moved a bit, so it looks like the train's leaning. But you can also get high vibration, high fast pan rates. You can get problems where the image is leaning or looks very soft if you get vibration. Global shutters get rid of this problem. However, global shutters tend not to have the dynamic range of rolling shutters and tend not to be as sensitive. So it tends to need a bit more light. So this is the full-size Blackmagic Ursa. There's one of these downstairs on the van. The full-size Ursa has a Super 35 sensor. It's the same sensor at the moment as in the Ursa Mini here and the Production 4K. It shoots RAW and ProRes. So you can either shoot ProRes with a Gamma on a 709 Gamma, traditional video in ProRes, which you don't have to go into DaVinci and muck about with, or you can shoot RAW stuff, which you get more latitude, more fiddling with in post, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It does 120 frames a second. If you've got the Ursa, the second generation Ursa with this sensor will do 120 frames a second in 4K. So amazingly, the same as the VariCam, although the camera is a fraction of the price. But you must have 2 cards in it, and this is using CF2 cards. CF2 cards are currently about 500 quid for 256 gigs, so you'd need 2 500 gig cards to do 4K RAW at 120 frames a second. This has got 12 gig SDI out, CFast 2 cards, PL mount or EF mount, 12 stops of dynamic range, global shutter, 10-inch screen. It's got an iPad on the side. It's a huge, great flip-out screen. And it weighs 7.5 kgs. And if anyone wants to know what 7.5 kgs feels like, it feels slightly unfeasibly heavy, and go and pick one up and have a play with it, because it's a brilliant camera. For the money, they're astonishing, but you know, it does weigh a bit. You wouldn't necessarily want one on these shoulders unless you're married to a chiropractor. So tripod, fantastic and incredibly stable, but you know, handheld, you know, to be honest, cameras used to weigh that much. When I used to be a cameraman, you know, everything was 7.5 plus, and you know, by the time you'd added the batteries, I mean, God, when I first did it, there were separate recorders and things. So you know, it isn't really that heavy, but it's because it's quite compact, it is surprisingly heavy for the size of it. The Ursa Mini really was the answer to people who said the Ursa's too heavy for their sort of run and gun shoulder mount stuff. So you can see one of these here, same Super 35 4K sensor, RAW and ProRes, 60 frames a second in dual card mode, so it can't do the same frame rates as a full-size Ursa because there's not as much cooling, so it can't do 120 frames a second. 12 gig SDI, it can do 50 frames in 4K or 50 frames in UHD through the SDI connection. CFast 2 recording. There's 2 mount options. There will be a PL mount which you can use B4 lenses with, so you can use HD broadcast B4 lenses with the PL adapter, which you can get with this camera. So there's going to be 2 different versions, one which will do PL or B4 and the other one which does EF. It is basically Canon EF lenses. So if you use a B4 HD broadcast lens on, you know, one of these big sort of zoom on the side broadcast lenses on it, you only shoot HD. You're not shooting 4K. It actually shoots to a window on the sensor. But it becomes a very good, very cost-effective HD camera. Bearing in mind the center portion of this camera is about 2,000 quid. This is not an expensive piece of kit. 12 stops of dynamic range, global shutter, because it's the same sensor as the other ones. But there will be a new sensor coming next year, which is 4.6 resolution, 4.6K resolution, so higher resolution, and a headline feature for me is 15 stops of dynamic range is what they're claiming for it. There is some footage online. Have a look on Vimeo and YouTube. There's more and more stuff going up there now. The buggers haven't given me one to play with, but a lot of people are raving about the range of the sensor. I think for the money, that will be the peach. You know, but at the moment, this camera will be considerably cheaper with the 4K, with the existing 4K sensor.
The 60 frames per second,
yeah.
Is that in 4K? What
it
is
is.
It doing to HD?
It will do a high, I believe it does 120 frames in windowed HD. So it won't do.
What's the crop in the window?
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's using native pixels,
Right.
so you could probably work it out with mass or ask one of the Blackmagic guys downstairs. But it's definitely going to be a crop. What would it be? It's 1.6 on a Super 35 anyway. So if you're coming into it that much more, it's going to be about 3. It's going to be at least 3. That's a guess, but the B4 adapter has got an optical element in it.
Right.
So, and the optical element is spreading it rather than reducing it. a little.
Like a
So
Metabones.
yeah, like an opposite to Metabones, I believe, because of course the before lenses are expecting a smaller 4/3 sensor, and you're putting it on a larger area of sensor. So it's working like a reverse.
Okay.
So you might lose half a stop, but you're using a slightly larger element. God, almost remembered. All right, so here we go. So the Blackmagic cameras, the Ursas and the production camera all come with DaVinci Resolve, a full version of DaVinci Resolve, a dongle, worth 700 quid plus. So you get that free of charge. You don't get it with the micros, but you do get it with the bigger cameras. So DaVinci Resolve you can use for grading and editing. Since DaVinci Resolve 12 came out, the editing side of it has been much improved. You can do a lot of audio, a lot of video editing. Anybody who wants to try it, get it for free for a Mac or PC. Just do a search on DaVinci Free or go to the Blackmagic website. It is totally free for a version which can do everything apart from output bigger than 4K, and it doesn't have the noise reduction, but everything else is in the free version. It's remarkable what they've given you for nothing. So the full version, which includes noise reduction and also more collaborative stuff, if you're working in a post-production house, that's when you'd want the full version, or if you want noise reduction. There are loads of tutorials out there, and I'll mention one a bit later on, which I found was particularly useful, a 35-minute get started on DaVinci Resolve tutorial. You need a decent spec Mac or PC to run DaVinci Resolve. You need, especially for 4K, you really need something. This is a i7 16 gig of RAM Quadro graphics card, cost £2,000 about a year and a half ago. Works, does do 4K, but it's right at the edge of what it can do. You really need something very recent to get good performance out of DaVinci. The good thing about DaVinci actually is it uses a lot of graphics acceleration, so the same card that plays Tomb Raider at 50 frames a second is going to do a bloody good job with DaVinci in 4K. So if you've got an old PC or an older PC, but you can uprate the graphics card and get NVIDIA graphics card, that will give you better performance in DaVinci. There's a few caveats, but most of the very fast gaming NVIDIA cards were very good for DaVinci as well. So consider using a TV or Blackmagic output card. I mean, this is basically because when you're working with a laptop, the laptop screen, for instance, mine is 1920 1080. It's not even giving me 4K out if I want to look at 4K, but the colors aren't right. It's running at 60 Hertz. It's not giving me a realistic portrayal of what you'll get on a video monitor. Whereas you can see the monitor there, the SmartView 4K, this monitor here, that's a proper UHD monitor from Blackmagic, which will give you 4K up to 50 frames or 60 frames a second through 6 gig SDI, and it costs about 1,200 quid, so it's not hugely expensive. Or you can go down to John Lewis's and buy a 4K ready Panasonic or Sony telly, which have got HDMI in, and you can use one of these little intensity cards from Blackmagic, which cost 120 quid. And in a PC, that will give you 4K monitoring, but proper video out at 50 frames a second. So bear in mind, you don't have to spend a fortune. This little box here will only give you HD out, but it gives you SDI or HDMI out, 99 quid. It's got Thunderbolt in one side and HDMI and SDI at the other end. And if you're using Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, or DaVinci Resolve or Edius, it will give you an output to a proper monitor when you're working with footage on the timeline. This will give you 4K output. It's an Ultra Studio, and this one is one I've got in my bag. It's an Ultra Studio 4K, so this laptop has Thunderbolt out. £600 box is giving me SDI, quad SDI, 6 gig SDI, HDMI, or analog audio, capture and playback. And if round the other end, it's just got a bunch of BNCs and XLRs and things like that. So if anyone wants to see it, I've got it in my bag. Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about a log. I'm going to accelerate this now because we want to get and play with the kit. So cameras like the Panasonic VariCam, DVX and the GH4 use this log gamma contrast. So it increases dynamic range to give you more detail in the highlight and shadows. Anyone who knows log, that's what it's for. You need DaVinci or something else to make the video look good on screen. To be honest, you can just go into Premiere, give it more contrast, give it more saturation, and you're getting to the look of the image, but it's more sophisticated than that to get your skin tones right, to get it looking good. Log makes video look more filmic. It gets rid of that sort of that limited dynamic range look that you can get from video having overblown highlights, so the sky's all white, whatever you're doing, and no detail in your shadows. Log doesn't take up more memory as a codec because it's basically squashing the dynamic range. It's lessening the contrast, so you've got more information in your highlights and your shadows. So it's not a trick that needs much higher data rates on your card. So this is something I shot on this camera, well, not this one, that one over there actually, the DVX200, and it just shows that was the standard gamma. The sun was about here, by the way, and that is log gamma. Now, if this was a Pana TV, you'd see more of a difference, but as it's a Sony, but you can see there's a lot more detail in the clouds at this part of the image. There's a lot more subtlety in the shadows as well. So this is after I've graded it. So let me just move that on. So this is the V-Log. So now, if you asked me, would I shoot everything V-Log on one of these cameras? No, I wouldn't, because I couldn't be asked to take everything I've shot into DaVinci and have to fiddle with it to get back to standard colors. But with a shot like this, which I know I'm going to be pushing the dynamic range, I know that I want to get detail in those clouds to make it look more filmic. That's when I'd use it, when I want the dynamic range. The rest of the time I'd be happy with one of the scene modes, which gives me nice crushed shadows or whatever. But I'll just go on to, this is a vector scope. In DaVinci you've got these useful vector scope and waveform monitors, or waveform monitor, which just shows how much extra detail is in the log shot. See, those are the highlights up the top there. They're all crushed up here. There's just no detail in my highlights. This one got lovely mountain ranges of detail. I can pull out more stuff. Even though this was 8-bit 420 onto the card, I've still got more stuff I can play with in post. So shoot log when you need it on stuff.
Is that just press the button?
But, yep, you just change scene file from log to, yep, it's a scene file, so it's a couple of presses, but yes, you can do it.
You see it as well.
Yes, you do. You see it's very flat dynamic range, but if you press a button called log assist on it, then you'll see what it's going to look like after you've corrected it in post. So you've got a log assist button. But log shooting, it's not for everyone, because you look at the images sometimes, you think, oh God, that's noisy, that looks awful, I don't want to touch that. And it means you do have to process it. But what I did was I Googled lookup table for GH4 log, and loads of people are giving them away free on the internet. Downloaded a couple of little files, virus checked them, obviously, and then I used somebody else's lookup table to convert the log, so I didn't have to fiddle too much to get a good looking result from the log file. And there are lots of cheats available. It's just a bit of Googling to find out how to save time and effort. But if I use standard gamma, I could just put that straight on my timeline in any edit software, work with it straight away. If you do log, you do end up doing more fiddling in post-production. Right, so this is the DaVinci Resolve interface, and have a play with Resolve. It is free for you to download. Try it on your own Macs or PCs and see what you get out of it. But I just added this lookup table. Once you've loaded it into the right place, I just used this vlog. I just added a file, popped it in the right directory, and then all you have to do is right-click on the shot and say add lookup table, job done. If you're lazy. Of course, you can fiddle around to your heart's content if you've got time and effort, but if you haven't, you can just add a lookup table. And in fact, I think the new version of Adobe will let you add lookup tables quite easily, and other software, they're adding this feature. So it's not just DaVinci. Right, there you go. So this is the tutorial I was talking about. Come and grab me, I'll see if I can copy it or send you an email with it on. But I basically spent about half an hour Googling DaVinci tutorials before I found one which I thought, I can understand that, this is quite easy. And somebody is just taking it end to end, from importing footage to doing a rough grade on it to spitting it back out again as a finished file. So this tutorial is excellent. Casey Farris, ground control DaVinci Basics 12. You don't need the URL, if you just do ground control DaVinci Basics, you'll find it.
Can I ask a question that you
Yeah.
may or may not know? Might be unfair to ask it.
Nothing's unfair.
If a lot of
Disney at
guys-
Christmas though. No, no.
A lot of the guys here will work for broadcast, a lot will do their own stuff, and some of us mix in between.
Yeah.
So one day we're having to supply an S-log
Yeah.
and the next day we want to do vlog. If we wanted to do vlog but give it to the usual S-log editor,
Then he'd have to know it's vlog. He'd have to know it's vlog, not S-log, because you'd want a different lookup table, or you'd need to do different things to them.
Would you be able to handle it as long as he knows?
Oh yes, yeah. Any colorist worth his salt would be fine. I mean, you know, maybe if he's used to S-log, he's going to recognise the log file straight away anyway. And you know, if he knows what camera it's shot on, he just knows to use the vlog. You know, it'll be the same if you gave him a Canon log. They're all slightly different, but it's all the same process. It's just subtly different the way they've squeezed extra dynamic range in. So most of the things I've read about vlog from Alistair Chapman relating to S-log also apply to vlog. You know, it's not a bad idea to expose to the right when you're recording 8-bit. You know, it's you doing the same thing. You're squeezing dynamic range in, so it's a good idea to overexpose a bit so you don't get noisy shadows. So yeah, all the stuff you're reading about vlog, Canon log, S-log, it all applies across the board. They're all very similar. ARRI log, it's all very similar. Right, I'm just going to talk a little about RAW because this is the differentiation between the Ursas and the DVX. So the RAW video from which the Ursa is capable of recording is straight from the sensor, raw data, just like when you're filming. I shoot raw stills on my Canon stills camera. Oh shit, I said I had a Canon, whoops. But I do. And I shoot raw with it because, you know, I've got that extra 2 stops up and down. I can push it in Lightroom afterwards. I can get more out of my shots. I can tweak it perfectly. It's exactly the same shooting raw on a video camera. You get more range, more tweaking potential in post-production. There's a hell of a lot more processor power in your laptop or desktop than there is in your camera, because it doesn't have to run on batteries all day and it doesn't have to have a sensor, and it doesn't, you know, you paid $2,000 for your laptop, it's got tons of processing grunt. So the point is, once you've got the raw data from the sensor, you can use more powerful processing power to pull more detail out of these images. So it's 12-bit. We've talked about 8-bit recording on the DVX, 10-bit for ProRes HQ, ProRes 422, and incidentally this camera can output 10-bit 422 through the HDMI and through the SDI output. So if you've got an external recorder, you can record 10-bit. Anyone wants a discussion on 10-bit, 8-bit, I'll do it later. I need more coffee for that. But 12-bit is even more bits. There's more subtlety in the gradation. There's more subtlety in your blue skies. There's thousands. What is it? 16,000 different shades of blue. It's much more subtle, really, and this also means you can push it further in post-production. So 12-bit raw recording on the Blackmagics is better than broadcast in a lot of ways. It uses Adobe's open source digital negative DNG format, so a lot of software can read the RAW from Blackmagic cameras without having to use Resolve, but bearing in mind they give you Resolve, try Resolve. And RAW video allows more adjustment in post than anything else. Just like in Lightroom with my stills, I can push it further. And the files can be very big. 4K RAW files are not dinky. So, 18 minutes of RAW on a card costing 500 quid on the Ursa Mini here. So 9 minutes if you're shooting 50p, and you'd need 2 256 gig cards to go onto those. But of course, 2 256 will give you, 18 minutes. 3 minutes if you're on the full-size Ursa doing 120 frames a second. But you can shoot compressed RAW. And it might sound like an oxymoron, but it's not. Compressed RAW is using a mathematical compression and a slightly lossy compression, just like if you're using RED cameras, and most other cameras have a compressed RAW format. It's not just Blackmagic doing this, but suddenly then you're getting 40 minutes if you use 3:1 RAW. So if you're not quite so anal about your picture quality, if you don't mind putting up with tiniest hint of a compression artifact occasionally with fast motion or whatever else, you can shoot this 4K RAW 3:1, and I think that is the mode you should probably concentrate on if you want RAW, that is. So you get 20 minutes if you're shooting 50p and that 3:1 RAW. And don't forget, you can shoot ProRes HQ and you'll get 46 minutes on. So if you don't want to fiddle in post, you dial in a 709 lookup table. You have a standard video profile. You're not going to do much in post. You'll just perhaps use ProRes HQ and get 46 minutes on your card. And if you choose to shoot HD, you get a whole 3 hours on one 256 gig card if you're shooting HD and not 4K. So you have got some flexible options with the Ursa. Right, this is just to give you an idea. Actually, when I did this, I hadn't got the camera for very long. As you probably know, it's quite hard to get hold of Ursa Minis, and I had it delivered to me about 4 in the afternoon, and this was about a month ago. And my daughter, I dragged outside and said, just need to get a shot. Of course, forgetting the hours had just changed and it got dark. So this is the best I could shoot. But this is a log file, or what they call film gamma, on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini. And I went into the camera raw settings in Blackmagic DaVinci. And because I'm happy with Lightroom, I don't know DaVinci very well, but I do know Adobe Lightroom quite well. I've been using it for stills for 5 years. So I felt more comfortable changing these basic settings: exposure, color, temperature, shadows, mid-tone boost. You can change your ISO and your Blackmagic totally in post-production. You don't set them in the camera, you don't have to worry about what they're set in the camera. Everything, even the ISO, is totally get-atable in post-production in DaVinci. So, and there's a little box here, highlight recovery, which is very useful. And after just changing a few settings, that's what I had. Now, of course, one is, you know, film gamma and one is video gamma, but you've got a terrific amount of control over the image in the raw processing, something you don't get with log processing. You don't get so much ability to push the image. So that's what I ended up with, and it was just a few tweaks. Now, if you have a look at the difference, have a look in the highlights here. See what the highlight recovery's pulled back, so there's nothing holding those bits on. You know, they've become slightly more usable. It really is getting the subtlety in the skin tones, even though the sun was down, you know, the sun had gone, it was still light, it was dusk, but the sun had gone down, there's still some lovely gentleness in the skin tones. And it's quite amazing what you can get out of the footage. And it reminded me, I'd forgotten what it's like to work with raw video, because it'd been ages since I'd done anything raw. And suddenly I thought, oh, this is great, I can cover all my mistakes. So, but of course, it's not just that. With a bit of tweaking, you know, I can pull my colors a bit. What I did with the color settings was I gave myself slightly blue shadows and slightly warmer highlights. You know, suddenly that's my simple little colorist grade. I've just made the skin tones warmer and the shadows bluer. You know, that's the point. You can then get creative because you've got this latitude, because the colors are much more subtle. You're able to change the colors so much more in post-production. You can change the look of the file. So raw stuff, you've just got a lot more range. I'm not a colorist.
What's the data rate on raw then?
Well, in order to, you can work it out. 256 gig is 9 minutes. So
It only goes onto the cards, and you can't.
CF2. No, you can't push. It doesn't come through. I made this mistake. I did a talk for Visual Impact on RAW, and I said, oh, you can't get RAW out of an SDI, but actually you can with other makes, but you can't with Panasonic and Blackmagic Design. So I assumed you couldn't. But you then need a specialist recorder to record it, you know, which is obviously a huge thing. But Blackmagic or the Blackmagic cameras only do RAW through their internal recording. There's no RAW on the SDI output. So that's, with RAW, you get huge flexibility, ability to change ISO and white balance, recover more detail. And with RAW, you'll need large amount of CFast 2 storage, a recent and decent Mac or PC. This was really struggling with RAW. We've really struggled. I could get about a frame. I could put it on quarter res, it was okay, it would play it back, but I could only get about a frame every second when I was playing back that stuff. But it doesn't matter so much. When you're grading, it doesn't matter so much because you're looking just like a still image. The color's not going to change hugely from shot to shot, so you grade it, then move on to a different frame and make sure it's not changing too much. Big fast hard drives, I needed SSDs in my laptop. I've got an SSD to do RAW, otherwise you're not going to get it on spinning disks unless you've got a RAID array. And lastly you need time. Because the trouble is, just like my wife always takes the mick out of me, because when we get back from a holiday, she calls it going into the dark room, because I go and, go into Lightroom with all my raw stills and I say, oh, you can't see anything yet, I haven't developed them yet, I haven't fixed them. It's the same whenever you're working with the raw footage, or to some degree with the log footage as well. Your client isn't going to be happy with the look they're seeing on the monitors, and you can tell them, oh, don't worry, it won't look like this, but they're still going to be a bit worried about it. So it's quite a good idea. We've got a small HD 702 monitor where you can put a lookup table on the monitor, so you can show the client what that looks like, so they're seeing it once you've got a grade on it rather than the actual raw stuff.
The Blackmagics don't do that, because I know you can do that on the Sony. You can output the lookup table onto a monitor.
Yeah.
But you can't on the Blackmagic.
You can if you've got a 702 monitor,
No,
but you're right. You can.
The FS7 will do it internally and then output.
The FS7, which costs a lot more. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. You can actually, on the flip out screens on the Ursa, it will show you a video gamma with a log recording, so you can see what it looks like, but it won't output that through the SDI cable. The small HD, we've got one on the sort of mobile rig there.
Mini as well as the Ursa.
That's right.
Main one.
Yeah. Anything on in fact, the only difference between the full-size Ursa and the Mini in terms of spec is that the full-size Ursa does 120 frames a second 4K and the Mini does 50. They're both CF2 cards. They're both, at the moment, all the sensor, the 4K sensor, it's the same. Oh, incidentally, the full-size Ursa, that is one other difference. The full-size Ursa you can change the sensor on the front. The whole lens mount and sensor unit come off. They don't with the Mini. You can't change. The lens mount is separate to the sensor on the Mini. So a full-size Ursa can be upgraded once this new 4.6K sensor comes out. You can change it, but you couldn't on this one. So thanks for being so patient, but hopefully now I've covered some of the questions you'd ask when you actually prod and poke the cameras, but feel free to ask any questions now. If not, go and play with the kit and come and ask them afterwards. But thanks for listening.
30mm on that Panasonic.
Pardon?
The 30mm end on Panasonic.
Yeah, it's actually, oh, here we go.
What sensor is it 30mm on or?
Right. This has got many crop modes depending on what you're filming in. If you're filming in HD, it uses the whole width, the 16 megapixels width of the chip. So it's this chip inside is 60 megapixels wide. So if you're using all of that width, it's 28mm or about 29mm. But if you're shooting UHD,
equivalent to a full-size 35mm camera.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So it's pretty wide, pretty good, pretty good wide. If you're shooting 4K at 25p, it's using about 12.5 megapixels wide, and it becomes about 30, 31 or so. But if you're shooting, and its best mode is UHD at 50p, because then it's using 8 megapixels. It's actually using, there's pixel for pixel 4K, so there's no aliasing. It's very, very clean pictures. But then it's about 37mm, so it's zoomed in a bit.
The same size as an old 35mm.
Yes,
camera.
exactly, the equivalent, yeah. So, not that that makes sense really. You ought to have a look at it and see how much you can get in the room, because of course, unless you're shooting on a 5D, it's not a good comparison, because the other cameras are Super 35, so they have about a 1.7 crop factor compared with that. But it does mean that depending on the mode you're shooting with this, you get different crop factors. So basically, if you were in a very small room, you might switch it to HD filming, so you get that extra width. But if you don't mind, then the best mode it does by far is the 50p UHD. That's 37mm, so it actually is a bit more zoomed in than you'd get with some camcorders. It's not quite as wide, but you'll get the best pictures. I'm totally confident. I've tried it on a resolution chart, and you get terribly clean images at that setting. But you also get the best HD SDI output when it's in 50p UHD mode. It's a really clean look to it. It's a compromise. It's a very good, very clever compromise for what did the guys at ProActive say? Was it 2.7 or something plus that? You're getting an incredible piece of kit that's got this built-in lens, which would cost you hundreds of pounds separately, and the ability to use cheap cheap cards for filming. But the caveats are, the Ursa will do higher quality by far. with its 12-bit RAW recording, and the Ursa will do a higher frame rate. And of course, with interchangeable lenses, you can get much shallower depth of field as well. The lens on this, by the way, ramps. It starts at 2.8 at the widest end, but it ramps to about 4.5 when you're zoomed in. So you know, again, you can still get shallow depth of field because obviously with the telephoto, you're still getting quite shallow depth of field. But you know, bear that in mind. It's only 2.8 at the very widest.
And then one question before I go on the Ursa Mini.
Yeah.
Have you got a built-in waveform monitor in the viewfinder?
Waveform? No, I think it's got a histogram. I don't believe it's got a waveform at the moment. This has got waveform, but yeah, I don't think so. But we'll go and have a look because, to be honest, I can't remember seeing it. I think I've seen a histogram and not a waveform. I like a waveform for exposing. I must admit, I really like that on the Pana. But we've got the lovely 702 small HD monitor, and that has full screen waveform monitor, and it's a really nice add-on. And you know, I know it sounds, I am a salesman, you know, but the 702 monitor is amazing because it's fully daylight viewable. You've got a 7-inch screen that you can use in full sunshine and still be seeing everything on it. And it's quite good to use the tools on the monitor, not on the camera. Because if you're, you know, I don't know, a camera like an FS7 or some of these cameras, the more tools you put on the screen, it feels like they're almost slowing down. They're using processor power to do the tools. They're becoming less useful. So it's quite good offloading some of the processing to another device. And with the 702 monitor, by putting a full screen waveform of Xscope, you can just quickly with a joystick flick between the waveform monitor, you know, focus assist, all these things without changing the camera viewfinder. Have a look at one, see what you think, but I think they're brilliant for that sort of stuff. Although it's £1,000, it should be brilliant. But
What's the Blackmagic recorder like? You know,
the video assist, there's one here. So come and have a play. It's the video assist here is on this Canon camera. So the screen's very good. It's native 1920 1080. If anyone doesn't know what this is, this video assist runs. It can use EP6 batteries. So Canon EP6, these batteries, and can take 2 of them. And it's both a full HD 1920 1080 monitor and a ProRes recorder onto fast SD cards. So you're able to record ProRes 422 10-bit onto, you know, relatively cheap 40 quid cards or so, and also have the features of field monitor, like being able to punch in. Again, no waveform yet, but you have got histogram on this. And it's got both HDMI and HD SDI inputs and outputs. So this box is 325 quid and will give you all those features, you know, monitoring, ProRes recording. It's built out of a solid block of aluminium. It's actually really built.
Resolve as well.
Does it?
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Which costs like double the price.
Wow.
Getting them, is that all right?
They're only just arriving. They're only just arriving now. We've you know, again, one for the guys downstairs. But they are arriving now. You know, we've certainly had quite a few through our warehouse, but we've also got a ridiculously large amount of back orders, so it's taken a while to come through. They really come with full Resolve?
Yeah, the new 12 whatever.
Pardon?
Resolve 12.
Oh right. I didn't know. Unless they're putting the light on. I don't remember seeing a dongle in the pack with it. Then it's the free one you can, right, so it's a free version which you can download anyway for free, so, right, good. Sorry, I'm just glad I didn't get, I'm sure I'd have noticed the dongle in the pack because I unwrapped one of these, but I thought, shit, I've lost a dongle. But it wouldn't make sense to put a 700 quid software with a 300 quid device. But they are amazing for the money, and you can, of course, use that with the Studio 4K camera because it has got 6 gig input. It can't record 4K, but it can monitor 4K and it can record HD if you put 4K in through 6 gig SDI. So it sounds a bit strange, but it does do a down res on recording, so you can use it as a 4K monitor, but with the caveat that it's, you know, HD. But yeah, have a play with one of it. It's touchscreen. You've got to get used to the interface because you sort of, depending on whether you swipe left, swipe right, swipe up or down, it does something different. So you've got different display settings as set up here. Whatever. So if you go into it, it depends what you do.
Is it a calibrated screen as well?
It's, you know, to be honest, I've set this right in the middle and it looks pretty good to me, but I've never, I think at 325 quid you're asking for a lot. It's for it to be fully calibrated as well. So I don't think you can use a spider or anything to get it perfect, but It's only 300 quid.
Which is probably why Tomos are throwing away spiders in December.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I couldn't possibly say. But for the money, I think they're fantastic. If you look at the build quality as well, it is built from a solid block of aluminium. It's, you know, it means it's a bit heavier than you might think, but the quality, this will really last in your kit bag as long as you protect that touchscreen.
Which is heavier, that or the 502?
The 50, this is heavier. This is heavier than a 502. A 502 is a better monitor because it's got the waveform, it's got the ability to switch between screens, it's got the pixel zoom in, it's got much more flexibility, and it's a brighter screen as well. But it doesn't record, whereas this records. So the one you'd want depends on if you want recording or not.
Video systems in now as well, it's in the new firmware.
Yeah, but it's not with the 502. You can move the joystick to whatever area of the picture, and it will go into 4 times. You know, it's a lot more flexibility. But you're right. With this, it just goes in the middle.
What formats does it record on?
ProRes. ProRes 422, ProRes LT. Let's have a look. Let's have a quick. So you just touch up here on the format. It auto detects whatever you're playing into it. Oh, there we are. Touch codec. So you've got HQ, PR, proxy, LT, ProRes, the standard ProRes, or so HQ, ProRes 422, LT, and proxy. And you can set a record trigger based on SDI or HDMI or timecode run. And the source, it auto detects the source. Now initially,
Would it run on Canon as well as?
I don't know. I don't know. I've tried. It. Have you got one?
Yeah.
All right. Right. Because I find with some of them, it's been a bit problematic. Until we got that firmware update, it wouldn't run with the GH4 properly. But I haven't tried it since we had a firmware update. It's only a couple of weeks. No.
Is that a cheaper way of recording off the Ursa?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Into ProRes, you could record into ProRes HQ on much cheaper SD cards. So it would be a very good, you obviously wouldn't be getting 4K recording, but you'd only be getting HD. But you'd be getting very affordable media. So for some jobs, you could just be using that on top of your Ursa, and for other jobs, you're using the internal recording. Yeah, I mean, it does do 50p in HD. One thing, it's quite interesting actually, this whole business of 4K and broadcast quality and 422 and if you shoot on this camera, if you shoot 420 8-bit in 4K and you put that on a timeline in Adobe Premiere or in DaVinci Resolve and you put you put the sizing, the resizing to the highest quality setting, you will get 10-bit 444 HD out of it, which theoretically is fully broadcast compliant. And it does look, and basically what it's doing is, because it's averaging from 4 pixels down to 1 pixel, it's actually sort of squeezing your chroma resolution, your color resolution together in order to give you more color resolution. And it also gets rid of a hell of a lot of noise. So a picture that can look really noisy in 4K, once you've squeezed it, again, once it's done the pixel averaging, because noise is sort of all over the place, it isn't a steady signal. Once it's averaged out by compressing the 4K down to HD, you get much lower noise and you get much higher color resolution. So it's a little piece of magic. And so by shooting 4K, you get the best possible HD. But the caveat with this one is I think you have to be shooting 50p UHD, because if you're shooting 25p, then you're not using native pixel for pixel. So then you get spatial aliasing, you get, you know, that your power lines looking like flights of steps. You get problems with the sensor scaling has created interfering with your clean resolution. So the best pictures out of that 4K or UHD 50p downsized on the timeline in edit software to HD, and you'll get some cracking pictures out of it that way. Yeah. Whereas of course if you've already got 12-bit 444, you know, raw from that, and then you resize that, then are you getting 16-bit or 24-bit? You know, theoretically, the color's going to be even better. The resolution's going to be that much better. So downsampling, you know, not everybody wants to output 4K at the moment, but you get better HD if you shoot 4K. If that's the last question, feel free to mingle, play. Do go down, make the effort to go and look at the 4K workflow they've got on the bus downstairs, the Blackmagic van, and the guys from Blackmagic will be very happy to take you through anything I didn't know.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, thanks guys.